I got the email on a Tuesday morning, and I knew immediately it was going to ruin my entire week. The subject line read, "Mandatory Special Assessment Immediate Payment Required," and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. I'm Tyler Norris, and I'd been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Jacksonville, Florida, for 3 years without any major issues. Sure, the HOA was annoying sometimes, but it was nothing compared to what was about to unfold. The email was from Barbara Hutchins, the president of our HOA board. Barbara was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, "HOA Karen." She was 52 years old with that specific haircut that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." Always wore pearl necklaces even to neighborhood meetings, and had a voice that could cut through steel. Her emails were always written in all caps for the important parts, and this one was no exception. According to the email, every homeowner in our 147-home community was being charged a special assessment of $3,500, due within 30 days. The stated reason was emergency roof repairs to the community clubhouse and unexpected legal fees. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee getting cold in my hand, reading the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't missing something. There was no breakdown of costs, no vote mentioned, no meeting scheduled to discuss it. Just a demand for $3,500 with threats of liens and foreclosure if we didn't pay. I pulled up our HOA's governing documents, which I'd thankfully saved when I bought the house. I spent the next 2 hours reading through the bylaws and the Florida statutes governing HOAs. What I found made my blood run cold. According to Florida law, any special assessment over $1,000 or exceeding 5% of the annual budget required a vote by the homeowners. Our annual budget was around $85,000, which meant this $514,500 assessment was more than 6 times our entire yearly budget. There was no way this was legal. I called my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived 2 doors down. Marcus was a real estate attorney, though he didn't specialize in HOA law. "Did you get the email?" I asked as soon as he picked up. "About the assessment?" "Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. This is insane, Tyler. They can't just demand this kind of money without a vote." "That's what I thought. I've been reading the statutes. This has to be illegal." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Let me make some calls. I have a colleague who deals with HOA disputes. But Tyler, if this is what I think it is, this could get really ugly really fast." By that evening, I'd heard from at least 10 other neighbors. Everyone was panicking. Most people in our neighborhood were middle-class families. We had teachers, nurses, small business owners, retirees on fixed incomes. Nobody had $3,500 just lying around to hand over to the HOA, especially not with 30 days' notice. A few people had already called Barbara directly, and according to them, she'd been dismissive and rude, insisting the assessment was legal and necessary. The next morning, I decided to go to the HOA office myself. It was located in the clubhouse, a decent-sized building with a pool, gym, and meeting room. Barbara was there along with Denise Patterson, the HOA's treasurer. Denise was in her mid-40s, always wore too much makeup, and had a habit of laughing at inappropriate times. The third board member, Gerald Foster, was apparently out of town. "I'm here about the special assessment," I said, trying to keep my voice level. Barbara looked up from her computer with an expression that suggested I was wasting her time. "What about it, Tyler? I don't think it's legal." Florida Statute 720.303 requires a vote for assessments of this size. Barbara's face tightened. "We consulted with our attorney. Everything is completely legal. The bylaws give the board authority to levy assessments for emergency repairs." Not assessments of this size, I countered. And I'd like to see the documentation for these emergency repairs. Invoices, estimates, something that justifies over $500,000. Denise laughed that nervous laugh of hers. We don't have to show you anything. The board has the authority to make these decisions. Actually, you do. Homeowners have the right to inspect financial records. Barbara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Listen here, Tyler. I've been on this board for 8 years. I know what I'm doing. If you don't pay the assessment, we'll file a lien against your property. Is that what you want? I want transparency. I want to see proof that this money is actually needed and that it's being spent appropriately. Get out of my office, Barbara said, her voice cold. You have 30 days to pay. That's final. I left the clubhouse furious. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about Barbara and her cronies thinking they could bully an entire neighborhood into compliance. When I got home, I started a Facebook group called Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners United. Within 24 hours, 93 people had joined. The group exploded with activity. People shared their experiences trying to get information from Barbara. One woman, Jennifer, said Barbara had hung up on her. Another neighbor, Paul, said Denise had told him to just put it on a credit card when he explained he couldn't afford the assessment. The more we talked, the more suspicious things became. Someone pointed out that we just had the clubhouse roof replaced 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a 30-year roof. Why would it need emergency repairs now? Another person mentioned that they'd never seen any legal issues that would require tens of thousands in legal fees. The HOA hadn't filed any lawsuits or been sued, as far as anyone knew. Marcus came through with his contact. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she specialized in HOA disputes and Florida Community Association law. She agreed to meet with a group of us that Saturday. 10 of us showed up at Marcus's house, and Rachel didn't mince words. Based on what you've told me, this assessment is almost certainly illegal, she said. But here's the problem. Fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They're betting that most of you can't afford to hire an attorney or don't want the hassle. So what do we do? Asked Jennifer, a single mom who'd been close to tears explaining she lived paycheck to paycheck. We have a few options. First, I can send a demand letter to the board requiring them to rescind the assessment and provide financial documentation. Second, if they refuse, we can file a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. They oversee HOAs in the state. Third, if there's evidence of fraud or misappropriation of funds, we can contact the state attorney's office. You think there's fraud? I asked. Rachel looked at her notes. A special assessment of this size with no documentation, no vote, threats of immediate liens and hostility toward transparency. Yes, I think there's something wrong here. At minimum, it's gross mismanagement. At worst, it's embezzlement. We pooled together $5,000 to retain Rachel. She sent a detailed demand letter to the HOA board the following Monday, citing multiple violations of Florida statutes and the HOA's own bylaws. She demanded they rescind the assessment, provide 3 years of financial records, and schedule a homeowner meeting within 14 days. Barbara's response came 2 days later, not through an attorney but in another, all-caps email to the entire community. She called those of us who'd hired Rachel troublemakers who were damaging property values and creating unnecessary conflict. She insisted the assessment stood and that anyone who didn't pay would face immediate legal action. She didn't address any of the legal issues Rachel had raised. That's when Rachel filed a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The complaint was detailed, outlining every violation we'd identified. She also sent a copy to the state attorney's office in Jacksonville, with a cover letter suggesting there might be criminal activity involved. I didn't expect much to come from the state attorney angle. From what I understood, they handled major crimes, not HOA disputes, but I was wrong. 2 weeks after Rachel filed the complaints, I got a call from an investigator named Detective Andrew Walsh. He was with the Economic Crimes Unit of the state attorney's office. "Mr. Norris, I'm calling regarding your HOA complaint. We've begun a preliminary investigation, and I'd like to meet with you and your attorney to discuss what you found." My heart was pounding. "You're actually investigating?" "Yes, sir. Your complaint raised several red flags. When we pulled preliminary financial records, we found some inconsistencies that warrant a deeper look. Can you meet tomorrow?" Rachel and I met Detective Walsh the next day at the state attorney's office downtown. He was in his early 40s, professional, and had a stack of documents on his desk that looked intimidating. "Here's what we've found so far," Walsh said. "Your HOA has an annual budget of approximately $85,000, correct?" "That's right," I confirmed. "In the past 3 years, the board has made multiple large expenditures that weren't properly documented or approved. We're talking about $200,000 that's either missing or was spent without proper authorization." Rachel leaned forward. "What kind of expenditures?" "That's the problem. We can't tell. The financial records are a mess. There are checks written to cash, transfers to accounts we can't trace, and vendor payments that don't have corresponding invoices. Your president, Barbara Hutchins, is listed as a signatory on all of these transactions." "So she's been stealing from the HOA?" I asked. "We're not ready to make that determination yet, but it's looking that way. That's why I need your help. We need to understand what legitimate expenses the HOA should have had versus what was actually spent. We're also going to need to talk to other board members and get more homeowners on record about what they've experienced." Over the next 3 weeks, Detective Walsh's investigation expanded rapidly. He interviewed dozens of homeowners. He subpoenaed bank records, credit card statements, and correspondence between board members. What emerged was a pattern of corruption that went back at least 5 years. Barbara had essentially been running the HOA like her personal piggy bank. She'd written checks to herself for management fees that weren't in the budget. She'd used the HOA credit card for personal expenses, everything from groceries to a vacation to Aruba. She'd hired her nephew's landscaping company at inflated rates and kicked back half the payment. The clubhouse roof didn't need repairs at all. That was a complete fabrication. The legal fees were partially real, but they were from an attorney Barbara had hired to defend her when a homeowner had threatened to sue over her spending. Denise, the treasurer, had known about most of it and had helped cover it up. She'd falsified financial reports and destroyed documents. Gerald, the third board member, claimed he'd had no idea what was happening, and the investigation seemed to support that. He'd been largely absent from board meetings and had essentially been a rubber stamp. The special assessment had been Barbara's desperate attempt to refill the HOA's depleted reserves before anyone realized what she'd done. She'd thought she could bully everyone into paying and make the financial problems disappear. Instead, she'd drawn the exact attention she'd been trying to avoid. On a Wednesday in late March, Detective Walsh called me. "We're making arrests tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know." "Barbara and Denise?" "Yes. We have enough evidence to charge them with organized fraud, grand theft, and scheme to defraud. The amounts involved exceed $200,000, which makes these second-degree felonies. They're looking at up to 15 years each if convicted." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I'd wanted accountability, but it was sobering to realize just how serious this had become. What happens to the HOA now? The state will appoint a receiver to take over temporarily. You'll need to hold new elections and completely reconstitute the board. The receiver will do a complete financial audit and figure out exactly how much money was taken. The state will attempt to recover funds through the criminal proceedings, but realistically, you probably won't get everything back. The arrests happened the next morning at 6 a.m. I wasn't there, but my neighbor Paul lived across from Barbara and filmed the whole thing on his phone. Barbara was led out in handcuffs, yelling about how this was a witch hunt and that she'd done nothing wrong. Denise apparently broke down crying and had to be practically carried to the police car. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. That evening, the local news ran a story about it. HOA president arrested for allegedly stealing over $200,000 was the headline. The reporter interviewed several homeowners, including Jennifer, who tearfully explained how she'd been terrified of losing her house over the illegal assessment. The state-appointed receiver was a man named Robert Torres, who'd managed community associations for 20 years. He was professional, thorough, and remarkably patient given the mess he'd inherited. His first meeting with homeowners was packed. Every seat in the clubhouse was filled, with people standing along the walls. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Robert said. "Your HOA's finances are in terrible shape. The reserve fund, which should have around $150,000, has less than $3,000. Regular operating funds are depleted. Based on my preliminary review, approximately $240,000 was misappropriated over a 5-year period." The room erupted in angry shouts and questions. Robert held up his hand. "I understand you're upset. You have every right to be. Here's what's going to happen. First, the criminal proceedings will continue. The state is aggressively pursuing asset recovery. Barbara Hutchins owns her home in this community outright, plus a rental property in Palm Coast. If she's convicted, those assets will likely be seized to repay what was stolen." "What about the special assessment?" someone shouted. "It's void. Completely illegal, as your attorney identified. No one needs to pay it, and if anyone already did, you'll get that money back. However, we do need to address the HOA's financial situation. I'm going to propose a legitimate special assessment, but it will be done properly. We'll have a full budget, complete transparency, and a homeowner vote. I estimate you'll need about $500 per household to stabilize operations while we recover stolen funds." That was a number people could handle. It was still painful, but it was reasonable and, most importantly, legal. Over the next few months, the full scope of Barbara's theft became clear. She'd stolen $243,600 over 5 years. She'd hidden it through a combination of fake invoices, unauthorized bonuses, personal expense reimbursements, and direct transfers to accounts she controlled. Denise had received about $30,000 for her help in covering it up. Both women were indicted by a grand jury in May. Barbara's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the state attorney's office wasn't interested in being lenient. This was a high-profile case, and they wanted to send a message that HOA board members who abused their positions would face serious consequences. The trial was scheduled for September, but Barbara ended up taking a plea deal in August. She pleaded guilty to organized fraud and grand theft, receiving a sentence of 8 years in prison followed by 10 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $243,600. Her house and rental property were seized and sold, recovering about $180,000. Denise pleaded guilty to being an accessory, and received 3 years in prison plus restitution of her portion. While the criminal proceedings were ongoing, we held new HOA board elections. I hadn't planned on running, but so many people asked me to that I felt obligated. Marcus ran too, along with Jennifer and 3 other neighbors who'd been active in fighting the illegal assessment. We all won easily. Our first order of business was implementing new financial controls. We required 2 signatures on all checks over $500. We instituted monthly financial reports that were posted online for all homeowners to review. We hired a legitimate property management company to handle day-to-day operations, with clear oversight from the board. We also amended the bylaws to require homeowner approval for any expenditure over $5,000 that wasn't in the approved annual budget. Robert Torres stayed on as a consultant for 6 months to help us get things running smoothly. He was invaluable in teaching us how to properly manage a community association. The problem with most HOAs, he told me one day, is that board members think of it like a kingdom they rule instead of a corporation they're managing on behalf of shareholders. Homeowners are the shareholders. Every decision should be made with transparency and accountability. By October, things had stabilized significantly. The restitution money from Barbara's asset seizures had replenished most of the reserves. The legitimate special assessment of $500 per household had covered immediate operational needs. We'd renegotiated contracts with vendors and found we could actually reduce annual dues slightly because Barbara had been overpaying companies that were giving her kickbacks. The clubhouse, which Barbara had claimed needed a new roof, was inspected by a licensed contractor. The roof was fine. It had at least 20 more years of life. The whole thing had been a lie to justify the illegal assessment. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my back porch when Marcus came over with a couple of beers. "Can you believe it's been 8 months since this whole thing started?" he said, handing me a bottle. "Feels like years," I replied. I never thought a stupid HOA email would lead to felony convictions and prison time. "You did good, man. If you hadn't pushed back, Barbara would have gotten away with it. Everyone would have paid that assessment, she would have covered up her theft, and it would have continued for who knows how long." I took a sip of beer, thinking about that. I just couldn't stand the injustice of it, you know. The way she talked down to everyone, like we were stupid for questioning her. The bullying, the threats. Even if there hadn't been theft, that behavior alone was wrong. "That's what these people count on," Marcus said. "They count on everyone being too scared or too tired to fight back. Most people would rather just pay and avoid conflict." We sat in silence for a bit, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Kids playing in a yard somewhere. A dog barking. Normal suburban sounds. It felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for months. The following week, I got an email from Detective Walsh. "Thought you'd want to know," he wrote. "Barbara Hutchins was officially sentenced today. 8 years in Florida State Prison." The judge noted in his remarks that she'd violated the trust of her entire community and showed no remorse until she was caught. He said HOA board members hold a fiduciary duty to the homeowners they serve, and when they abuse that duty, they deserve the full weight of the law. I forwarded the email to our Facebook group, which had remained active as a general community discussion forum. The responses were mixed. Most people were satisfied with the outcome, glad that justice had been served. A few felt bad for Barbara, saying 8 years seemed harsh. I understood both perspectives, but personally, I felt the sentence was appropriate. She'd stolen $250,000 from her neighbors, people who'd trusted her. She'd threatened families with foreclosure to cover up her crimes. Actions have consequences. In November, we held a community meeting to discuss the recovered funds and future planning. The turnout was huge. People who'd never attended an HOA meeting before showed up. There was a different energy than before, something engaged and optimistic. "We've recovered $180,000 from the sale of Barbara's properties," I announced. "The state is also garnishing Denise's wages, though that will take years to fully repay her portion. With the money we've recovered plus the special assessment funds, our reserves are now at about $195,000, which is actually better than they should have been if Barbara had never stolen anything." There was applause, which felt surreal. 6 months ago, people had been panicking about losing their homes. Jennifer raised her hand. "What about the money we spent on the attorney to fight this? Are we getting reimbursed for that?" "Good question. The state included attorney fees in the restitution order, so yes. Everyone who contributed to hiring Rachel will be reimbursed from the recovered funds." More applause. I could see people visibly relaxing, the stress of the past months finally lifting. We spent the rest of the meeting discussing future projects. The playground equipment needed updating. The community pool area could use some renovation. Street lights in a few sections needed repair. These were normal, mundane HOA issues, and it felt wonderful to be dealing with them instead of criminal investigations and illegal assessments. After the meeting, an older woman named Helen approached me. She was in her 70s, had lived in Meadowbrook Estates since it was built 15 years ago, and had been on the original HOA board before Barbara took over. "I want to apologize," Helen said quietly. "For what?" "I was on the board when Barbara first joined. I saw signs that something wasn't right, the way she talked about money, how secretive she was, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause drama, and I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. If I'd spoken up back then, maybe none of this would have happened." I shook my head. "Helen, you can't blame yourself. Barbara was good at manipulation. She had answers for everything, made people doubt themselves. That's what con artists do. Still, I should have trusted my instincts." "I'm glad you did." That conversation stuck with me. How many times do we see something wrong and stay silent because it's easier? Because we don't want to be seen as troublemakers, or because we doubt our own judgment. Barbara had counted on that silence, had cultivated it through intimidation and gaslighting. December brought the holidays, and a sense of normalcy returning to the neighborhood. We organized a community holiday party at the clubhouse, something that apparently used to happen years ago but had stopped when Barbara took over. Over 100 people showed up. There were kids running around, neighbors who'd never really talked before getting to know each other, and a general feeling of community that had been missing. Marcus's wife, Linda, found me by the punch bowl. "You should be proud of what you did," she said. "You gave people their neighborhood back." "I just asked some questions and refused to be bullied," I replied. "That's more than most people would do. You stood up when it mattered." In January, nearly a year after that first email about the illegal assessment, we held our annual HOA meeting. It was the best attended one in the community's history. We presented a complete financial report, every dollar accounted for and explained. We discussed the annual budget, and homeowners actually asked intelligent questions and made suggestions. It was how an HOA was supposed to function. During the meeting, we also took a vote on several bylaw amendments designed to prevent future abuse. We implemented term limits for board members. No one could serve more than 4 consecutive years. We required annual independent financial audits. We created a process for homeowners to petition for special meetings if they had concerns about board actions. We established clear procedures for transparency, including mandatory monthly financial reports and quarterly homeowner updates. Every amendment passed with over 90% approval. Afterward, Rachel Kim, who'd attended as our guest, pulled me aside. "You know, I've been practicing HOA law for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of bad situations. This is the first one I've seen that ended with real criminal accountability and genuine reform. Most of the time, the bad actors just resign and move on, and the same problems pop up a few years later with new people. Why do you think it worked out differently this time?" I asked. "A few reasons. You had a strong group of homeowners willing to stick together. You got law enforcement involved early, and they took it seriously. And honestly, Barbara was so blatant about what she was doing that it was impossible to ignore once people started looking. But the biggest factor was you. You didn't give up when she tried to intimidate you. A lot of people would have. I thought about those early days, how scared I'd been when Barbara threatened to put a lien on my house. How I'd lost sleep worrying that maybe I was wrong, maybe I was the one causing problems. It would have been easier to just pay the money and move on with my life. But I hadn't, and because of that, dozens of families had been protected from financial harm. A criminal had been brought to justice. A community had been reformed and strengthened. It felt good, though it also felt exhausting in retrospect. By February, the last loose ends were being tied up. The state officially released our HOA from receivership, declaring that we'd implemented sufficient controls and reforms. We received the final restitution payment from Barbara's asset sales. Denise was in prison, and according to news reports, Barbara was working in the prison laundry and had been denied early release consideration. I was sitting in the HOA office one afternoon, going through some paperwork, when Gerald Foster stopped by. He'd stayed in the neighborhood despite his association with the previous board, though he kept a low profile. "Tyler, you got a minute?" he asked, looking uncomfortable. "Sure, come in." Gerald sat down heavily. He'd aged noticeably over the past year, looking older than his 63 years. "I wanted to apologize. I know I said I didn't know what Barbara was doing, and that was technically true. But I should have known. I should have been paying attention. I let her run everything because it was easier than actually doing the work of being a board member." "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "I voted for you in the election for what it's worth. You and the others. I figured the least I could do was support people who actually give a damn." He paused, looking down at his hands. "My wife wants to move. She's embarrassed by the whole thing, worried about what the neighbors think of us. But I don't know. This is our home. We've been here 12 years. Gerald, people don't blame you. They blame Barbara and Denise. You were negligent maybe, but you weren't malicious. There's a difference. Still feels bad. Then stick around and be part of making things better. Come to meetings, volunteer for committees, show people you care about the community." He nodded slowly. "Maybe I will." After Gerald left, I sat thinking about accountability and redemption. Barbara had blamed everyone but herself, even at sentencing. She'd claimed she was being persecuted, that the money she took was owed to her for her hard work managing the HOA. She'd shown no understanding of the harm she'd caused or the betrayal of trust. That's why she was in prison. Gerald, on the other hand, had been negligent and lazy, but he seemed to genuinely understand his failure and want to do better. That difference mattered. As spring arrived, Meadowbrook Estates had transformed. Not physically, though we did install new playground equipment and repair the broken streetlights. The transformation was in how people interacted with their community. Homeowners were engaged, informed, and active. Board meetings had actual attendance. The Facebook group was full of helpful discussions about neighborhood issues instead of angry complaints. The clubhouse, which had been Barbara's fortress and symbol of power, became what it was supposed to be, a community gathering place. We started hosting regular events, movie nights for kids, book clubs, a monthly coffee meeting where neighbors could chat and get to know each other. Simple things, but they built connections. One Saturday in April, I was at the playground with my girlfriend Olivia. We'd been dating for about 6 months, and I'd told her the whole HOA saga on our second date. She'd been fascinated and slightly horrified. "You know what's wild?" Olivia said, watching kids play on the new equipment our non-corrupt board had purchased. A year ago, those same kids were playing here while their parents were terrified about losing their homes, and the only difference is that you decided to read some HOA bylaws and send some emails. "It was more than that," I protested. "Not really, though. The whole thing started because you asked questions and didn't accept because I said so as an answer. That's all it took to unravel the whole scheme." She had a point. Barbara's entire operation had been held together by intimidation and the assumption that no one would seriously challenge her. Once someone did, it fell apart quickly. "Makes you wonder how many other HOAs are running the same scam," I said. "Probably a lot. But hopefully some of them heard about what happened here and decided it wasn't worth the risk." In May, Detective Walsh invited me to lunch. We'd stayed in occasional contact throughout the investigation and aftermath, and I'd grown to respect him immensely. "I wanted to thank you," Walsh said over sandwiches at a downtown deli. "The Meadowbrook case opened up 2 other investigations. We got tips about HOAs in Orange Park and St. Augustine running similar schemes. We're looking into both of them now." "Seriously?" "Yep. Turns out HOA fraud is more common than people realize. It's usually smaller amounts, a few thousand here and there, which makes it harder to detect. But what Barbara did was so egregious that it brought attention to the whole issue. The state attorney's office is considering creating a task force specifically for HOA financial crimes." "That's incredible." Walsh leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You know what the sad thing is? Most people who get scammed by their HOA never report it. They're embarrassed, or they don't think anyone will care, or they can't afford an attorney. The bad actors count on that. They count on people feeling powerless. So what's the solution? Education and enforcement. People need to know their rights, know what red flags to look for, and know that they can fight back. And law enforcement needs to take these cases seriously, not dismiss them as civil matters. What Barbara did was theft, plain and simple. It deserves criminal prosecution." I thought about Jennifer, the single mom who'd been in tears thinking she might lose her house. I thought about Paul, the retiree on a fixed income who'd been told to just put it on a credit card. I thought about all the families who'd been victimized by someone they'd trusted to manage their community. "I'm glad it worked out," I said finally. "I'm glad she didn't get away with it. Me too, and a lot of that is because of you." By summer, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA had become something of a model for how to run a community association properly. We'd been featured in a Florida newspaper article about HOA reform. Rachel Kim used our case as an example in seminars she taught about homeowner rights. I'd even been invited to speak at a statewide HOA conference, though I declined. I wasn't interested in becoming some kind of HOA reform activist. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house. Our board continued to function smoothly. We had disagreements sometimes about priorities or spending, but they were normal, healthy disagreements. We listened to homeowners, we operated transparently, and we followed the law. It shouldn't have been revolutionary, but apparently in the world of HOAs it was. In August, I got a letter from the Florida Attorney General's office. They were implementing new regulations for HOA financial oversight, partly in response to the Meadowbrook case. HOAs over a certain size would now be required to have annual independent audits. Financial records would have to be posted online for homeowner access. Special assessments over a certain threshold would require not just homeowner votes, but also state review. The regulations weren't perfect, but they were a step in the right direction. One evening in September, exactly 18 months after that initial email from Barbara, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Marcus walked over. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." Marcus settled into one of my porch chairs with a beer. "I was just thinking about everything that happened. The illegal assessment, the investigation, the arrests, all of it. And I realized something. Barbara could have gotten away with it." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If she just kept the theft small and steady, never gotten greedy with that massive assessment, she probably could have kept stealing for years. Maybe forever. It was her own greed that brought her down. That's usually how it works with criminals, isn't it? They get away with it for a while, get cocky, push too far, and that's when they get caught." True. But it also required someone to notice and care enough to fight back. That was you, man. You could have just paid the money and moved on. Would have been easier. Maybe. But I've never been good at just accepting things I know are wrong. Marcus raised his beer bottle. To not accepting wrong things. I clinked my bottle against his. To asking questions and reading the bylaws. We both laughed and it felt good. The whole ordeal had been stressful and exhausting, but we'd come through it. Our community was stronger, safer, and better managed. Barbara and Denise were in prison, paying for their crimes. Other HOAs were being investigated, and new regulations were being implemented to protect homeowners statewide. As autumn arrived, I finally felt like I could close the chapter on the whole experience. The criminal proceedings were done. The financial recovery was complete. The reformed board was running smoothly. Life had returned to normal, or better than normal, but I'd learned some important lessons that I knew I'd carry forever. I learned that standing up to bullies and abusers is hard but necessary. I learned that systems of power, even small ones like an HOA board, can be corrupted if there's no accountability. I learned that most people want to do the right thing but need someone to take the first step. And I learned that real change is possible when people come together around a common cause. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA scandal could have been just another story of people being victimized by those in power, feeling helpless and defeated. Instead, it became a story about ordinary people refusing to be victims, demanding accountability, and creating real change. It became a story about how one person asking questions and refusing to back down could expose corruption and bring criminals to justice. Barbara Hutchins probably thought she was untouchable. She'd been stealing for 5 years without consequences. She'd intimidated and bullied her way through any challenges. When I first questioned the illegal assessment, I'm sure she thought she could just steamroll over me like she had with everyone else. She was wrong. And because she was wrong, 147 families were protected. $250,000 was recovered. 2 criminals went to prison. An entire community association was reformed. And new statewide regulations were implemented to protect thousands of other homeowners. All because someone read the bylaws, sent some emails, and refused to give up when things got hard. In October, Helen, the older woman who'd apologized to me months earlier, organized a community appreciation barbecue. It was her way of celebrating the neighborhood's recovery and new beginning. Nearly everyone showed up, filling the clubhouse grounds with the smell of grilled food and the sound of laughter. Helen pulled me aside at one point. "I wanted you to see this," she said. gesturing at the crowd. "This is what Meadowbrook used to be like before Barbara. Neighbors actually knowing each other, caring about each other. You gave us that back." "We all did it together," I replied. "No, Tyler, you started it. The rest of us followed your lead. Don't diminish that." Looking around at my neighbors, at kids playing and adults chatting and people genuinely enjoying their community, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was worth every stressful moment, every sleepless night, every confrontation with Barbara's hostility. As the sun set over Meadowbrook Estates that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd trusted my instincts when that email arrived. Grateful for neighbors like Marcus who'd supported me. Grateful for professionals like Rachel Kim and Detective Walsh who'd taken our concerns seriously. Grateful for a legal system that, when pushed, had delivered justice. The illegal assessment email that had arrived 18 months ago had been meant to intimidate and extract money through fear. Instead, it had sparked a chain of events that exposed corruption, brought criminals to justice, reformed a community association, and inspired statewide change. Barbara Hutchins had tried to charge an illegal assessment. The state attorney had investigated. The entire board had been shut down, with the corrupt members going to prison. And in the end, justice had prevailed. That's the story of how a simple email about an illegal HOA assessment led to felony convictions, financial recovery, and real reform in Meadowbrook Estates, Jacksonville, Florida. It's a story about the importance of asking questions, standing up to bullies, and refusing to accept injustice even when fighting back seems difficult or pointless. It's a story that proves one person really can make a difference, that criminals can be held accountable, and that communities can heal and become stronger after being victimized. And it's a story that I hope encourages others facing similar situations to trust their instincts, demand transparency, and fight for what's right. Because in the end, that's all it takes. Someone has to be willing to stand up and say, "This isn't right, and I'm not going to accept it." Someone has to be willing to ask the hard questions, to demand answers, to push back against intimidation and threats. Someone has to care enough to fight, even when the outcome is uncertain and the path is difficult. That someone can be anyone. It just has to be someone. In my case, I was that someone because I happened to be the one who got angry enough at an illegal assessment email to actually read the bylaws and realize something was wrong. But it could have been any of my neighbors. The potential for standing up to corruption exists in all of us. We just have to choose to act on it. As November arrived and the first anniversary of Barbara's arrest approached, our HOA board organized a community forum on financial literacy and homeowner rights. We invited Rachel Kim to speak, along with a representative from the state attorney's office and someone from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Over 60 people attended, asking questions about how to spot financial red flags, what rights they had as homeowners, and how to ensure their own HOA boards were operating properly. It was empowering to see people taking an active interest in something that, a year ago, most would have ignored as boring HOA stuff. After the forum, a young couple approached me. They just moved into the neighborhood a month earlier. "We chose Meadowbrook specifically because of what happened here," the husband said. "We read about the case and the reforms you implemented. It made us feel like this was a community that cared about doing things right." That comment stuck with me. Our community's darkest moment, the exposure of corruption and theft, had actually become something positive. It had demonstrated that we were a neighborhood willing to fight for integrity and accountability. That was a powerful message. December brought the holidays again, and with them, another community party at the clubhouse. This one was even bigger than the previous years. Someone commented that it felt like we were celebrating not just the holidays, but everything we'd overcome and accomplished together. Standing in that clubhouse, watching my neighbors laugh and celebrate, I thought about that Tuesday morning 2 years ago when I'd opened Barbara's email demanding $3,500. I thought about the fear and anger I'd felt, the uncertainty about whether fighting back was worth it, the stress of the investigation and legal proceedings. All of it had been worth it. Every moment of stress, every confrontation, every sleepless night. Because this community of engaged and empowered neighbors living without fear of corruption or abuse, this was the result. This was what fighting for what's right could achieve. As we moved into the new year, Meadowbrook Estates continued to thrive. Our HOA was financially stable, transparently managed, and focused on actually serving the community rather than enriching board members. We'd become a model for other HOAs, proof that reform was possible, and that homeowners had real power when they chose to use it. Barbara Hutchins remained in prison, with 5 more years left on her sentence. Denise had about a year remaining. Both were paying restitution from their prison wages, though at the slow rate those garnishments occurred, full repayment would take decades. But we'd recovered most of the stolen money through asset seizures, and our reserves were healthy. More importantly, we'd recovered something that can't be measured in dollars. We'd recovered our sense of community, our trust in our neighbors, and our confidence that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. We'd proven that the system, when pushed and given evidence, could work. We demonstrated that justice was possible, even in something as mundane as an HOA dispute. Looking back on everything that happened, from that first illegal assessment email to the arrests to the reforms to where we are now, I'm proud of what we accomplished. Not just proud of my own role, but proud of every neighbor who spoke up, every person who contributed to the legal fund, every homeowner who attended meetings and demanded accountability. We'd faced down a bully who thought she was untouchable. We'd exposed corruption that had been hidden for years. We'd brought criminals to justice through the proper legal channels. We'd reformed our community association to prevent future abuse. And we'd inspired changes that would protect homeowners across Florida. All because someone decided to read the bylaws and ask questions when something didn't seem right. All because someone refused to be intimidated into silence. All because someone believed that even ordinary people have the power to demand justice and create change. That someone happened to be me, Tyler Norris, just a regular guy who bought a house in Jacksonville and wanted to live peacefully in his neighborhood. But it could have been anyone. The power to stand up to corruption and fight for what's right exists in all of us. We just have to choose to use it, even when it's difficult, even when the outcome is uncertain, even when it would be easier to just pay the money and move on. Because if we don't stand up, if we don't fight back, if we don't demand accountability, then the Barbara Hutchins of the world will keep stealing, keep bullying, keep abusing their power. They'll keep victimizing innocent people who just want to live peacefully in their homes. But if we do stand up, if we do fight back, if we do demand accountability, then justice becomes possible. Change becomes possible. A better community becomes possible. And that possibility, that hope for justice and accountability and a better future, is worth fighting for. Always.